The emergency beacon cut through the silence of the Nexus 7 research station like a knife through steel. Chief Engineer Vexter's crystalline appendages clicked nervously against his control console as the signal pulsed across his screens. For 3 rotations, the deep space mining facility on Kepler's edge had been sending the same desperate message: total system failure, life support critical, requesting immediate technical assistance. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What made this particular distress call extraordinary wasn't the urgency. Mining stations failed regularly in the harsh conditions of the outer rim. What made it extraordinary was what they'd found floating in the debris field of an ancient Earth vessel, perfectly preserved in a cryogenic emergency pod. The stasis chamber hummed softly in the station's medical bay, its archaic cooling system somehow still functional, after what the carbon dating suggested was nearly 500 years. Inside, visible through a small porthole designed by engineers who had never heard of the Galactic Technology Consortium, lay a human male. His uniform bore symbols and text in the primitive script of pre-contact Earth, and according to the medical scanners, he was very much alive. Dr. Kess'ina adjusted her optical sensors and ran another diagnostic scan on the human specimen. Her species, the Vel'nari, had been conducting xenobiological research for over 2 millennia, but she had never encountered anything quite like this. The readings were fascinating and deeply troubling in equal measure. The human appeared to be approximately 35 standard years old, with brown hair that had grown slightly during his extended stasis and a face marked by what looked like stress lines around his eyes. His clothing was remarkably simple: a blue shirt with some kind of corporate insignia, dark trousers, and shoes made from what appeared to be synthetic leather. Around his neck hung a small rectangular device attached to a lanyard, too primitive for her equipment to properly analyze. Most intriguing of all was the expression on his unconscious face. Even in stasis, there was something about his features that suggested competence, patience, and perhaps most remarkably, a complete absence of the deference that characterized every human she had ever encountered. Modern humans were useful, certainly. They had been serving the consortium faithfully for over 3 centuries, ever since the integration accords had brought their species into galactic civilization. They were excellent at following detailed instructions, maintaining equipment according to strict protocols, and performing routine tasks without complaint. They rarely asked questions, never challenged authority, and seemed genuinely grateful for the guidance provided by more advanced species. This human looked like he might actually argue with someone. Commander Tholron entered the medical bay with his usual air of quiet authority. The Ketron military officer moved with the measured precision of someone accustomed to dealing with complex logistical challenges. His 4 arms worked independently as he reviewed data tablets and operated various interfaces simultaneously. "What's the status on our specimen, Doctor?" Tholron's voice carried the harmonic undertones that made Ketron's speech so distinctive. "Stable, but unusual," Kess'ina replied, highlighting sections of her analysis on the shared display. "His physiology is consistent with baseline human parameters, but there are anomalies. His muscle density is approximately 40% higher than standard human norms. His neural activity patterns show complexity levels that suggest enhanced cognitive function. Most puzzling, his stress hormone levels are completely normal, despite being removed from his natural temporal environment." Tholron's primary set of eyes focused on the readings, while his secondary pair continued monitoring the room's other displays. "Enhanced? Are you suggesting this is some kind of prototype?" "I'm suggesting this is what humans were like before the integration process," Kess'ina said carefully. "According to the historical records, early humans exhibited significantly different behavioral and physiological characteristics than their modern descendants." The commander's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "The records from that period are somewhat limited. Earth's transition to consortium membership involved significant social and biological modifications. Most of the documentation focuses on the improvements that were made, rather than the baseline conditions." Before Kess'ina could respond, the station's communication system activated with an urgent chime. The voice that followed belonged to Maintenance Supervisor Yelik, one of the few humans currently stationed on Nexus 7. "Commander Tholron, we've received another emergency transmission from Kepler's edge. Their situation has deteriorated significantly. All primary systems are now offline, and they're reporting complete failure of their emergency backup protocols. They're requesting permission to begin evacuation procedures. Tholrun's expression shifted to one of calculated concern. Kepler's Edge was one of the consortium's most productive mining facilities, extracting rare minerals essential for hyperdrive construction. More importantly, it housed over 12,000 beings from 47 different species. An evacuation would be complex, expensive, and potentially dangerous given the station's current condition. "What's the analysis from our technical team?" Tholrun asked. "The engineers believe it's a cascade failure in the primary computing network," Yilik replied. "The artificial intelligence system that controls life support, gravity generation, and environmental systems appears to have encountered some kind of logic loop that's causing it to shut down and restart continuously. Every time it attempts to resume normal operations, the same error occurs within minutes." Kess'ina listened to this exchange with growing interest. She had been following the situation at Kepler's Edge since the initial distress call, partly out of scientific curiosity, and partly because it represented exactly the kind of complex technical challenge that the consortium's best minds had been struggling to solve. The artificial intelligence systems used throughout consortium space were marvels of engineering, capable of managing incredibly complex operations with minimal oversight. They were also, by design, extremely conservative in their programming. Safety protocols took priority over efficiency, and any anomaly that couldn't be immediately resolved would trigger protective shutdowns. The problem with this approach was that sometimes the safety protocols themselves became the source of the problem. When an AI system became convinced that every possible solution was potentially dangerous, it could lock itself into a state of perpetual paralysis. "Has anyone tried a complete system reset?" Kess'ina asked. Yilik's voice carried a tone of mild surprise. "Doctor, with respect, a complete reset would take approximately 72 hours and would require manually overriding thousands of safety interlocks. The technical requirements are beyond the capabilities of anyone currently stationed at Kepler's Edge. Such procedures require Level 7 certification in consortium computing architecture, and there are only 18 beings in this sector with that qualification." "Of course," Kess'ina replied, though privately she wondered why something as conceptually simple as turning a computer off and on again required such elaborate credentials. Tholrun was already formulating contingency plans. "Begin preparation for an emergency technical response mission. I want our best systems specialists ready to depart within 6 hours. We'll need to transport a full diagnostic suite and be prepared for extended operations." As the commander left to coordinate the response effort, Kess'ina found herself staring at the human in the stasis chamber. Something about the conversation had triggered an odd correlation in her thinking. The humans she knew were competent technicians, but they always deferred to established protocols. They followed procedures exactly as written, and rarely attempted to improvise solutions. This human's uniform, however, bore insignia that she was beginning to recognize. The symbols and text were primitive, but the meaning was becoming clear through linguistic analysis. He had been some kind of technical support specialist for a company called Global Solutions, Inc. His identification badge, still hanging around his neck, identified him as Dave Chen, Senior Technical Specialist. What kind of technical problems had humans solved before they'd been integrated into consortium civilization? What methods had they used when they didn't have access to advanced artificial intelligence or standardized protocols? Her curiosity finally overcame her caution. "Medical AI. Begin the revival process for the human specimen." "Dr. Kess'ina," the AI replied in its carefully modulated voice. "Revival procedures for unknown specimens require authorization from a Level 5 command authority or higher. The specimen's physiological parameters are well within safe ranges," Kess'ina countered. "This is a standard xenobiological research protocol. The specimen is of unknown technological origin and may pose contamination risks to station systems," the AI continued. "Consortium Safety Regulation 247C specifically prohibits revival of pre-contact specimens without proper quarantine and analysis periods." Kess'ina paused in her argument. She had been working with consortium AI systems for decades, and she had never heard of Safety Regulation 247C. "Display the text of Regulation 247C. "I apologize, Dr. Kess'ina, but that regulation is classified above your current clearance level." This was becoming interesting in ways that Kess'ina hadn't anticipated. She was the station's senior xenobiologist with Level 6 research clearance. There were very few regulations that she wasn't authorized to review, particularly those relating to her own field of expertise. Medical AI provide a summary of all regulations that restrict my research activities. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. There are currently 847 regulations that may apply to your research activities, Dr. Kess'ina. Would you like me to display the complete list? How many of those regulations are classified above my clearance level? 423 regulations are classified above your current authorization. Kess'ina stared at the AI interface display. Half of the regulations governing her own work were classified beyond her ability to review them. She had never noticed this before because she had never attempted to access them. Medical AI. What is my current clearance level? You are authorized for Level 6 research activities, with restrictions in xenobiological modification protocols and temporal artifact analysis. What would I need to access Level 7 clearance? Level 7 clearance requires approval from the Consortium Science Council and must be sponsored by a member of the ruling assembly. Kess'ina had met exactly 3 members of the ruling assembly in her entire career, and none of them had shown any interest in sponsoring additional research clearances. The bureaucratic requirements for higher clearance levels weren't unusual in themselves, but the fact that so many regulations were classified suggested that there was more complexity to the situation than she had initially realized. She looked at the human in the stasis chamber again. His face showed none of the stress or anxiety that she would have expected from someone facing such a dramatic displacement in time. Even unconscious, he projected an aura of calm competence. Before she could reconsider her decision, Kess'ina manually activated the revival sequence. The stasis chamber systems responded to her direct override, beginning the careful process of warming the human's body and reversing the chemical processes that had preserved him. The procedure took approximately 40 minutes. During that time, Kess'ina monitored his vital signs and watched as his brain activity gradually increased. His neural patterns were unlike anything in her database of human psychology profiles. Where modern humans showed predictable patterns of deference and anxiety when awakening in unfamiliar environments, this human's brainwaves suggested alertness, curiosity, and what could only be described as professional assessment. His eyes opened slowly, focusing first on the ceiling of the medical bay, then tracking methodically around the room. When his gaze finally settled on Kess'ina, she saw something that she had never encountered before in a human: complete absence of fear. "Good morning," Dave Chen said, his voice slightly hoarse from the stasis process. "I'm guessing this isn't Kansas anymore." The translation system provided Kess'ina with context for the cultural reference, but she was more interested in his tone. He sounded like someone who was gathering information rather than someone who was overwhelmed by impossible circumstances. "You are aboard the Consortium Research Station Nexus 7, Kess'ina replied carefully. "You have been in cryogenic stasis for approximately 487 standard years. I am Dr. Kess'ina, and I am responsible for your medical care." Dave sat up slowly, testing his physical responses and looking around the medical bay with what appeared to be professional interest rather than confusion. "Okay, that's definitely longer than my usual weekend. Are you the system administrator here?" "I'm sorry, the person in charge of technical operations. I'm assuming there's been some kind of malfunction that resulted in me being revived, and I'm trying to figure out who I should be talking to about getting things sorted out." Kess'ina found this response remarkable for several reasons. First, Dave had accepted the information about his temporal displacement with minimal apparent distress. Second, he was immediately focusing on practical solutions rather than emotional processing. Third, he was asking about technical systems and operational hierarchies, in a way that suggested he expected to be involved in solving whatever problem had brought him here. "There is a technical emergency at one of our facilities," Kess'ina said slowly. "But I'm not sure how that relates to your situation." Dave's expression shifted to something that Kess'ina's training helped her recognize as professional focus. "What kind of technical emergency?" "A mining station called Kepler's Edge is experiencing complete system failures. Their artificial intelligence network appears to be stuck in some kind of recursive error loop that prevents normal operations." "How long has this been going on?" 3 rotations. Our best technical specialists are preparing an emergency response mission, But the complexity of the systems involved means that resolution could take several days. Dave nodded thoughtfully. Can I see the error logs? The simplicity of this request caught Kess'ina completely off guard. In her experience, humans never asked to see technical documentation directly. They waited for instructions from species better qualified to analyze complex systems. I don't have access to that information, she admitted. Who does? The station's chief engineer and the technical response team. Could you introduce me to them? Kess'ina hesitated. There were protocols for this kind of situation. Procedures that governed how newly awakened specimens should be processed and integrated into station operations. None of those procedures included consulting the specimens about ongoing technical emergencies. On the other hand, Dave's questions suggested a level of technical competence that she hadn't expected. His identification badge indicated that he had been some kind of technical specialist in his original time period. Perhaps there was value in at least exploring what he might be able to contribute. I should warn you, Kess'ina said, that our technology is significantly more advanced than what you would have encountered in your time period. Our systems are controlled by artificial intelligence networks that manage millions of variables simultaneously. Dave smiled for the first time since awakening, and Kess'ina was surprised by how reassuring the expression seemed. Ma'am, I've been doing technical support for 20 years. I've learned that the complexity of the system is usually less important than understanding what the system is supposed to do when it's working properly. 30 minutes later, Kess'ina was leading Dave through the corridors of Nexus 7 toward the engineering section. She had provided him with a basic orientation to the station's layout and a simplified explanation of consortium technology. But she noticed that he seemed more interested in observing how things worked than in asking questions about unfamiliar equipment. The corridors were designed to accommodate multiple species, with variable lighting, adjustable gravity fields, and atmospheric controls that could be modified for different physiological requirements. Dave examined these features with a kind of methodical attention that suggested he was building a mental model of the station's infrastructure. They passed several other humans during their walk, all wearing the gray uniforms of consortium maintenance personnel. Kess'ina watched Dave's reaction as he observed their behavior. The station's human workers moved with the careful, precise motions that indicated proper training and appropriate deference to other species. They kept their eyes down, spoke only when necessary, and showed none of the curiosity or independence that Dave was displaying. Are those people okay? Dave asked quietly. What do you mean? They look subdued, like they're afraid of getting in trouble. Kess'ina considered this observation. She had worked with human technicians for her entire career, and their behavior had always seemed perfectly normal to her. They were polite, hard-working, and reliable. She had never thought of them as subdued. Human workers are trained to be respectful and focused on their duties, she explained. The integration process helped your species develop better social adaptation skills. Integration process? The historical transition when Earth joined the consortium. Your species received significant support in overcoming various behavioral and psychological limitations that were preventing full participation in galactic civilization. Dave stopped walking. What kind of limitations? Kess'ina realized that she was discussing topics that she had never really examined critically. Her knowledge of human integration came primarily from standard educational materials, supplemented by her professional observations of modern human behavior. Aggression, independence, and technological overconfidence, she recited. Early humans had difficulty accepting guidance from more advanced species, and frequently attempted to solve problems using inappropriate methods. And that was considered a limitation? Well, yes. The consortium's success depends on species working together according to established protocols. Individual initiative can disrupt carefully balanced systems. Dave looked at her with an expression that she couldn't quite interpret. Dr. Kess'ina, in my experience, individual initiative is usually what fixes things when the established protocols aren't working. Before she could respond to this statement, they reached the engineering section. Chief Engineer Vel'nari was coordinating with a team of specialists from 6 different species, all working to finalize preparations for the emergency response mission to Kepler's Edge. Vel'nari noticed their approach and directed his attention toward them with the kind of focused intensity that his species brought to all technical challenges. Dr. Kess'ina, I understand you've successfully revived the human specimen. Are there any medical concerns that might affect our mission planning? The specimen is stable and alert, Kess'ina replied. Commander Vel'nari, this is Dave Chen. He was apparently some kind of technical specialist in his original time period. Dave stepped forward and extended his hand in what Kess'ina recognized as a traditional human greeting gesture. Vel'nari examined the offered hand with mild confusion before carefully making contact with one of his appendages. "Mr. Chen," Vel'nari said formally, "while I appreciate your interest in our operations, I should explain that modern technical challenges require extensive training in consortium protocols and systems architecture." "I understand," Dave replied, "but I've been listening to Dr. Kess'ina's description of the problem at Kepler's Edge, and I'm wondering if you've tried turning the AI system off and back on again." The sudden silence in the engineering section was so complete that Kess'ina could hear the subtle harmonics of the station's power systems. Every being present turned to stare at Dave with expressions ranging from confusion to something that might have been horror. Vel'nari's crystalline appendages began clicking rapidly against each other, a behavior that indicated extreme stress. "Mr. Chen, you are suggesting a complete shutdown and restart of a Level 9 artificial intelligence system that controls life support for 12,000 beings." "Well, not all at once," Dave said reasonably. "You'd obviously want to transfer critical systems to backup power and establish manual overrides for essential functions first. But if the AI is stuck in a logic loop, sometimes the only way to clear it is to force a complete reset. The procedures for such an operation require Level 7 certification and authorization from the Consortium Safety Council," Vel'nari explained with the patience typically reserved for explaining complex concepts to children. "The risk assessment alone would take several days." "How long do the people on Kepler's Edge have?" "Approximately 18 hours before life support fails completely." Dave nodded thoughtfully. "And how long would it take to implement your current solution?" "Our technical team estimates that full system restoration could require up to 72 hours, assuming optimal conditions." "So your plan is to spend 3 days fixing a problem for people who will be dead in 18 hours? The engineering section fell silent again. Kess'ina realized that Dave had identified a logical inconsistency that no one else had been willing to acknowledge. The established protocols for resolving the crisis were more comprehensive and theoretically safer than Dave's suggestion, but they were also completely inadequate for the time constraints of the actual emergency. Vel'nari's appendages had stopped clicking. "Mr. Chen, consortium technical protocols exist to prevent exactly the kind of catastrophic failures that could result from unauthorized system modifications." "I get that," Dave said, "but right now, you've already got a catastrophic failure. Sometimes the risk of doing something is smaller than the risk of doing nothing." Before anyone could respond to this statement, the communication system activated with another urgent message from Kepler's Edge. This time, the voice belonged to Station Commander Vel'nari, and the background noise suggested that conditions on the mining facility were deteriorating rapidly. "NEX-US-7, we have experienced additional system failures. Gravity generation is now fluctuating unpredictably, and our emergency atmospheric processors are operating at only 60% capacity. We are initiating immediate evacuation procedures for all non-essential personnel." Vel'nari began coordinating response efforts, but Kess'ina could see the calculation behind his actions. Even with emergency evacuation procedures, removing 12,000 beings from a failing space station would require multiple trips by the largest available transport vessels. The logistics were complex, dangerous, and unlikely to be completed before life support failed entirely. Dave was studying the displays showing real-time data from Kepler's Edge. "Dr. Kess'ina, are you able to access the station's technical logs from here?" "I have research access to some monitoring systems," she replied. "Could you show me what the AI is actually doing when it crashes?" Kess'ina hesitated. She had been observing the situation at Kepler's Edge primarily out of scientific curiosity, and she had indeed been monitoring the station's data feeds. But sharing that information with Dave would mean treating him as a legitimate technical consultant rather than an interesting specimen. Her decision was made when she looked at the evacuation timeline displayed on Vel'nari's screens. Even under optimal conditions, evacuation would save less than half of the station's population. She activated her research interface and displayed the AI diagnostic logs from Kepler's Edge. The data showed a pattern of system initialization, error detection, safety protocol activation, and shutdown that repeated every 4.7 minutes with mechanical precision. Dave studied the logs for several minutes, occasionally asking Kess'ina to expand specific sections or show related system data. His analysis was methodical and focused in a way that reminded her of her own approach to scientific research. "Okay," Dave said finally. "I think I see what's happening." Vexstar and several other engineers had stopped their preparations to listen to this assessment. Despite their obvious skepticism about Dave's qualifications, they were clearly interested in any new perspective on the crisis. "The AI is detecting what it thinks is a critical malfunction in the environmental control system," Dave continued. "Every time it tries to resume normal operations, it runs a safety check that identifies the same problem. The safety protocols require it to shut down rather than risk damage to life support systems." "Yes," Vexstar said impatiently. "That analysis was completed several hours ago. The question is how to resolve the underlying malfunction." "But what if there isn't an underlying malfunction?" Dave asked. "What if the AI is detecting a problem that doesn't actually exist?" Kess'ina examined the diagnostic data more carefully. "The environmental system readings are all within normal parameters." "Right. So why does the AI think there's a problem?" Vexstar's appendages began clicking again, but more slowly this time. "Are you suggesting that the artificial intelligence system is malfunctioning?" "I'm suggesting that the AI is working exactly the way it's supposed to, but it's been given bad information," Dave replied. "Look at this error code here. The system is reporting a sensor malfunction in Environmental Monitor 247. But according to the maintenance logs, that sensor was removed for routine calibration 3 days ago." Kess'ina felt something that she could only describe as excitement building in her chest. "The AI is trying to get readings from a sensor that isn't there." "Exactly, and because it can't get those readings, it assumes there's a critical failure. The safety protocols kick in, and the whole system shuts down. Then when it restarts, it tries to check the same sensor, gets the same non-result, and shuts down again." "But that's—" Vexstar paused, his expression shifting as he processed this analysis. "That's remarkably simple." "The best problems usually are," Dave said. "So the solution is to tell the AI to ignore that particular sensor until it's reinstalled, or to temporarily replace it with a software simulation that provides normal readings." The engineering section erupted in activity as Vexstar and his team began implementing Dave's solution. The technical details were complex, but the underlying concept was exactly as simple as Dave had suggested. They needed to provide the AI with the information it expected to receive so that it would stop detecting a non-existent emergency. Within 30 minutes, they had established a communication link with Kepler's Edge and guided the station's technical staff through the process of implementing temporary workarounds for the missing sensor. The AI system's error logs immediately showed different patterns as it began completing its safety checks successfully. 20 minutes later, Kepler's Edge reported that all primary systems had resumed normal operations. The silence in the engineering section was different this time. Instead of confusion or horror, Kess'ina detected something that might have been awe. "Mr. Chen," Vexstar said slowly, "you have just resolved a crisis that our best technical specialists estimated would require days of work." "Sometimes it just takes a fresh perspective," Dave replied. "When you're too close to a problem, it's easy to overthink the solution." Kess'ina was beginning to understand that Dave represented something that she had never encountered before. A human who approached problems with confidence rather than deference, who offered solutions rather than waiting for instructions, and who seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of complex systems that didn't depend on formal training or established protocols. "Mr. Chen," she said carefully, "would you be interested in consulting on other technical challenges?" Dave smiled again, and this time Kess'ina recognized the expression as genuine enthusiasm. "Dr. Kess'ina, I've been unemployed for 500 years. I'd love to get back to work." Word of Dave's success at Kepler's Edge spread through Nexus 7 faster than emergency containment protocols could be implemented. Within hours, department heads from across the station were submitting requests for consultation on problems that had been plaguing their operations for months. The consortium's carefully structured hierarchy of technical expertise suddenly found itself bypassed by maintenance workers who wanted to talk directly to the human who had fixed the impossible. Dr. Kess'ina discovered the extent of this disruption when she arrived at her laboratory the next morning to find 17 messages waiting for her, all requesting access to Dave for various technical emergencies. 3 separate department supervisors had already attempted to requisition him for permanent assignment to their teams. More troubling was the message from Station Administrator Quolith requesting an immediate briefing on the anomalous technical consultant and his impact on standard operating procedures. Dave was in the station's computer center, surrounded by a crowd of technicians from at least 6 different species. They had brought him problems ranging from a recurring malfunction in the waste recycling system to a mysterious energy drain that had been reducing efficiency in the station's power grid. Kess'ina watched as he listened to each problem description with the same focused attention he had given to the Kepler's Edge crisis. "The recycling system is shutting down every 12 hours?" Dave asked the Threnti engineer who had described the waste management issue. "Precisely. The automated systems perform a standard diagnostic routine, detect no problems, and then initiate a complete shutdown. We have been manually restarting the system twice daily for the past 6 months. Have you checked when the diagnostic routine was last updated?" The engineer's facial tentacles writhed in what Kess'ina recognized as confusion. "Updated? The diagnostic routine is part of the core system architecture. It would require authorization from the Consortium Engineering Council to modify." "I'm not talking about modifying it," Dave said patiently. "I'm asking when it was last updated. Sometimes diagnostic routines include time-sensitive checks that become obsolete as systems age." The engineer consulted his data tablet with increasing bewilderment. The routine was implemented 3 standard years ago as part of an efficiency upgrade. "And when was your recycling system installed?" "The current system has been operational for 7 standard years." Dave nodded thoughtfully. "So the diagnostic routine is looking for hardware that's newer than your actual equipment. It probably can't find the components it expects to see, so it assumes something is broken and shuts down the whole system." The solution, once again, turned out to be remarkably simple. The diagnostic routine could be configured to skip the checks for hardware components that weren't present in older systems. The fix took approximately 15 minutes to implement, and the recycling system immediately began operating normally. The crowd of technicians began asking Dave about their own problems with increased urgency. Each solution he provided seemed to generate more questions and more requests for assistance. Kess'ina realized that she was witnessing something unprecedented in her experience with consortium operations. The technicians weren't just interested in fixing their immediate problems. They were trying to understand Dave's approach to problem-solving itself. They wanted to know how he knew what questions to ask, how he identified the most likely causes of system failures, and why his solutions worked when more sophisticated analytical methods had failed. More importantly, they were beginning to question why they hadn't been trained to think about problems the way Dave did. "Mr. Chen," asked Yelora, a young Vel'nari engineer, "how did you learn to analyze technical problems so quickly?" "Practice, mostly," Dave replied. "When you're doing technical support, you see the same types of problems over and over again. After a while, you start to recognize patterns. But we receive extensive training in system analysis and problem resolution," Yelora continued. "Why are our methods less effective than yours?" Dave paused, considering his answer carefully. "Your methods aren't less effective, they're just designed for different priorities. Your training emphasizes following protocols and minimizing risks. My training emphasized fixing things as quickly as possible." "Why would those be different priorities?" asked another technician. Before Dave could answer, Kess'ina felt a presence behind her and turned to see Station Administrator Quolith approaching with obvious displeasure. The Krenti official moved with the deliberate authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance with his directives. "Dr. Kess'ina," Quolith said in his species' characteristically formal tone, "I believe we discussed the need for proper briefing procedures regarding anomalous specimens." The crowd of technicians immediately dispersed, recognizing the administrator's mood and the potential for disciplinary action. Dave watched them leave with an expression that Kess'ina was beginning to recognize as professional assessment of interpersonal dynamics. "Administrator Quolith," Kess'ina replied carefully, "Mr. Chen has been providing valuable assistance with several ongoing technical challenges." "Mr. Chen is an unprocessed specimen from a pre-contact civilization," Quolith corrected. "His integration status is unclear, his security clearance is non-existent, and his presence in sensitive operational areas represents a significant violation of consortium protocols." Dave stepped forward with the same calm demeanor he had shown when first awakening. "Administrator, I understand your concerns about protocol violations. Would it help if I submitted to whatever security screening procedures you normally use for technical consultants?" Quoleth's cranial ridges shifted in what Kess'ina recognized as surprise. "Mr. Chen, you are not a technical consultant. You are a temporal displacement, requiring careful study and eventual processing through appropriate integration channels." "What does that mean, exactly?" "It means that your presence here is temporary while we determine the proper procedures for your situation. The consortium has extensive experience with integrating pre-contact humans into modern civilization." Dave's expression didn't change, but Kess'ina noticed that his posture shifted slightly. "And what does integration involve?" "Psychological adjustment, social adaptation training, and physiological optimization to bring your capabilities in line with modern human standards," Quoleth explained with the tone of someone describing routine administrative procedures. "The process typically takes several months and results in significantly improved quality of life for the individual." "Improved how?" "Reduced anxiety, better social adaptation, and elimination of potentially problematic behavioral patterns that interfere with productive participation in consortium society." Kess'ina watched Dave's face as he processed this information. She saw something that she was beginning to understand was characteristic of his approach to problems. He was gathering information without revealing his conclusions. "Administrator," Dave said carefully, "would I still be able to work on technical problems after this integration process?" "You would be qualified for appropriate technical support roles under proper supervision," Quoleth replied. "The integration process helps individuals understand their optimal contribution to society." "Would I still be able to suggest solutions like the one that fixed Kepler's edge?" Quoleth's cranial ridges shifted again. "Mr. Chen, the solution you provided was effective but highly irregular. Proper technical support involves following established diagnostic procedures and consulting with appropriately qualified specialists. Individual innovation is discouraged because it can lead to unpredictable system interactions." Dave was quiet for several seconds. When he spoke again, his voice carried a tone that Kess'ina hadn't heard before. "Administrator, what happened to the humans who didn't want to be integrated?" "I'm not sure I understand your question. When Earth joined the consortium, what happened to the people who wanted to keep solving problems their own way?" Quoleth exchanged a glance with Kess'ina that suggested this was not a topic he was comfortable discussing. "Mr. Chen, the integration of Earth into consortium civilization was a voluntary process that benefited everyone involved. There were no significant objections to the improvements that were offered." "But what if there had been objections?" "The consortium does not compel species to accept membership," Quoleth said with slightly less certainty. "However, the benefits of integration are so significant that resistance is typically minimal." Dave nodded thoughtfully. "And if someone today decided they didn't want to be integrated?" "That would be unusual. Modern humans understand the advantages of their current status." "But hypothetically, if someone refused integration, what would happen?" Quoleth's discomfort was becoming increasingly obvious. "Mr. Chen, such situations are theoretical. The psychological profiling conducted during integration ensures that individuals develop appropriate perspectives on their role in society." Kess'ina realized that Dave was asking questions that she had never considered before. What did happen to beings who refused consortium integration? She had always assumed that the process was beneficial and voluntary, but she had never actually met anyone who had declined to participate. "Administrator," she interjected, "perhaps Mr. Chen would benefit from a tour of our integration facilities. It might help him understand the advantages of the process." Quoleth's cranial ridges settled into a more neutral position. "An excellent suggestion, Dr. Kess'ina. Mr. Chen, I believe you would find our integration center quite illuminating." Dave smiled, and Kess'ina noticed that the expression seemed different somehow. "I'd be very interested in seeing how integration works." 2 hours later, they were walking through the integration center's main facility. The center occupied an entire deck of Nexus 7 and contained some of the most advanced psychological and physiological modification equipment in consortium space. Administrator Quoleth had arranged for them to observe the integration process firsthand, confident that Dave would appreciate the sophistication and humanitarian benefits of the procedures. Dr. Melera, the center's director, was a Ketran specialist in cross-species psychology with over 40 years of experience in integration procedures. She guided them through observation areas where they could watch various stages of the process without disturbing the subjects. Integration begins with comprehensive psychological evaluation, Dr. Meltara explained as they watched a group of newly arrived humans undergoing assessment. We identify behavioral patterns that might interfere with productive social adaptation and develop individualized treatment plans. The humans being evaluated moved and spoke in ways that reminded Kess'ina of Dave when he had first awakened. They made eye contact with their evaluators, asked questions about the procedures, and showed signs of independent decision-making. They seemed alert, curious, and confident. "What kinds of behavioral patterns do you typically identify?" Dave asked. "Excessive independence, resistance to authority, and what we term solution orientation," Dr. Meltara replied. "These patterns often manifest as attempts to solve problems without consulting appropriate experts or following established protocols. And those behaviors are considered problematic? They can lead to system disruptions and social conflicts. Individuals with strong solution orientation tendencies often become frustrated when they encounter the complex approval processes necessary for system modifications. This frustration can manifest as resentment toward authority figures and rejection of collaborative approaches to problem solving." They moved to another observation area where humans who had been undergoing treatment for several weeks were participating in group exercises. These individuals moved more slowly and spoke in quieter voices. Their responses to questions seemed more measured and less spontaneous than those of the newly arrived subjects. "The intermediate stage focuses on cognitive restructuring," Dr. Meltara continued. "Subjects learn to recognize the emotional and social benefits of collaborative decision-making. They develop appreciation for the expertise of other species and understanding of their own limitations." Dave watched the group exercises with the same methodical attention he applied to technical problems. "How long does this stage typically last?" "Between 4 and 8 weeks, depending on the individual's initial resistance levels." "Resistance to what?" "To accepting their optimal role in consortium society. Some individuals require more time to overcome their pre-contact conditioning." The final observation area showed humans who had completed the integration process. They wore the gray uniforms that Kess'ina was familiar with, and moved with the careful, deferential manner that she had always considered normal human behavior. They followed instructions precisely, rarely initiated conversation, and showed appropriate respect for the authority of other species. The completed integration subjects demonstrate optimal psychological adaptation, Dr. Meltara said, with obvious professional pride. They report high levels of satisfaction with their roles and show minimal signs of the anxiety and frustration that characterize unintegrated humans. "They look like the humans I've been meeting around the station," Dave observed. "Yes, these individuals are ready for productive placement in various technical and maintenance roles throughout consortium space." Dave was quiet for several minutes as they continued through the facility. Finally, he asked, "Dr. Meltara, do any subjects ever refuse to complete the integration process?" "That would be highly unusual," Dr. Meltara replied. "The psychological conditioning includes development of intrinsic motivation for self-improvement. Subjects come to understand that integration is in their own best interests." "But what if someone did refuse?" Dr. Meltara exchanged a glance with Administrator Quolith. "Such cases would require specialized intervention. Persistent resistance to integration typically indicates underlying psychological disorders that require more intensive treatment." "What kind of treatment?" "Complete cognitive restructuring using advanced therapeutic techniques. The process is more complex, but it ensures that the individual can achieve the same level of satisfaction and social adaptation as voluntary subjects." Kess'ina felt a strange chill as she listened to this explanation. Something about the phrase, complete cognitive restructuring, suggested procedures that were more comprehensive than the standard integration process. "Is that treatment reversible?" Dave asked. Dr. Meltara's expression showed confusion. Why would anyone want to reverse successful integration? "The psychological improvements are permanent and represent optimal adaptation for the individual's well-being." "But hypothetically, could it be reversed?" "The neural modifications involved in complete cognitive restructuring are irreversible," Dr. Meltara admitted. "But this is beneficial as it prevents individuals from regressing to maladaptive behavioral patterns." Dave nodded slowly. "Dr. Meltara, how many humans go through this process each year?" Approximately 12,000 individuals across all consortium facilities. The program has been remarkably successful, with a 99.7% completion rate. What happens to the 0.3% who don't complete the program? Another uncomfortable glance passed between Dr. Meltera and Administrator Quolith. Those cases require referral to specialized facilities with more advanced treatment capabilities. Where are those facilities located? That information is classified above your current authorization level, Administrator Quolith interjected. Mr. Chen, I believe you've seen enough to understand the benefits of the integration process. As they left the integration center, Kess'ina noticed that Dave had become increasingly quiet. His questions had become more pointed, and his demeanor had shifted from curiosity to something that might have been calculation. Mr. Chen, Administrator Quolith said as they returned to the main station areas, I trust that your tour has been educational. We can begin your initial evaluation procedures immediately if you're ready to proceed. Dave stopped walking and turned to face the administrator directly. Thank you for the tour. I think I need some time to consider my options. Of course. However, I should mention that delays in beginning the integration process can sometimes result in increased psychological stress. The sooner we begin, the more comfortable you'll be during the transition. I appreciate the concern, Dave replied, but I'd like to discuss this with Dr. Kess'ina before making any decisions. Administrator Quolith's cranial ridges shifted into a pattern that Kess'ina recognized as bureaucratic displeasure. Dr. Kess'ina is not qualified to provide guidance on integration procedures. These decisions are best made in consultation with appropriate specialists. Nevertheless, I'd prefer to wait. Mr. Chen, I'm afraid that extended delays are not possible. Your current status as an unprocessed specimen creates security and administrative complications that cannot be indefinitely postponed. Dave's expression didn't change, but Kess'ina noticed that his posture had shifted again. Administrator, are you saying that integration isn't voluntary? Integration is always voluntary, Quolith replied carefully. However, individuals who choose not to integrate cannot remain in consortium space indefinitely. Alternative arrangements must be made for their relocation. What kind of alternative arrangements? That would depend on the specific circumstances. Dave looked at Kess'ina with an expression that seemed to be asking for her assessment of the situation. She found herself in the unusual position of questioning procedures that she had never examined critically before. Administrator, she said carefully, what would happen if Mr. Chen requested immediate transport to non-consortium space? Dr. Kess'ina, there is no non-consortium space within 12 sectors of this location. The nearest independent systems are beyond the range of civilian transport vessels. Dave smiled, but this time the expression seemed different from his earlier displays of humor. So my choices are integration, or being stranded somewhere that I can't actually reach. Mr. Chen, you're viewing this situation in an unnecessarily adversarial manner. Integration is designed to help you achieve optimal adaptation to modern civilization. Millions of humans have benefited from the process. And the ones who didn't benefit? Administrator Quolith's cranial ridges settled into a rigid pattern. Mr. Chen, I believe this conversation has become counterproductive. Dr. Kess'ina, please escort the specimen to appropriate quarters where he can consider his situation without further external influences. As they walked away from Administrator Quolith, Dave remained quiet until they were well out of hearing range. Finally, he spoke in a voice so low that Kess'ina had to strain to hear him. Dr. Kess'ina, I think we need to have a very private conversation about what happened to humanity. Dave's quarters were designed for temporary housing of specimens awaiting processing. The room was functional but sterile, with monitoring systems built into every surface. Kess'ina had disabled the audio surveillance using her research override codes, but she knew their conversation time was limited. The integration center isn't what they claim it is, Dave said without preamble. Those people weren't being helped, they were being reprogrammed. Kess'ina wanted to argue, but she couldn't forget the vacant expressions on the faces of the successfully integrated humans. The psychological modifications are meant to reduce anxiety and social conflict. By turning people into obedient machines, Dave replied. Dr. Kess'ina, real humans don't naturally defer to authority figures just because they're from different species. We question things, we solve problems, we get frustrated when bureaucracy gets in the way of fixing what's broken. But the historical records show that pre-contact humans were aggressive and difficult to work with. Dave sat down at the room's small workstation and began accessing the terminal. What historical records? Have you actually read primary sources from Earth's integration period? Those documents are classified above my clearance level. Convenient. Dave's fingers moved across the interface with surprising speed. Dr. Kess'ina, can you access the station's maintenance logs for the past year? That's routine operational data. Why? Because I want to show you something. Kess'ina reluctantly provided access to the maintenance database. Dave pulled up records of technical problems that had been reported throughout the station over the past 12 months. The list was extensive: recurring system failures, inefficient operations, and problems that required multiple repair attempts. Look at this pattern, Dave said, highlighting specific entries. The same problems keep happening over and over again. Your maintenance teams fix the immediate symptoms but never address the underlying causes. That's standard protocol. We follow manufacturer guidelines for all repairs. But the manufacturer guidelines don't account for how systems actually behave in real-world conditions. Dave showed her a series of power fluctuations that had been plaguing one section of the station. Your teams have replaced components 6 times, following the manual exactly. But the real problem is that the power routing was designed for optimal conditions that don't exist on this station. Dave's analysis revealed a simple modification to the power distribution system that would eliminate the fluctuations permanently. It was the kind of solution that violated several technical protocols, but would actually improve system performance. Your technicians probably figured this out months ago, Dave continued, but they're not allowed to implement fixes that deviate from approved procedures. Kess'ina stared at the data. You're saying that integration has made humans less effective at their jobs. I'm saying integration has turned natural problem solvers into people who follow instructions without thinking. The door chimed, and Administrator Quolith entered without waiting for permission. Behind him stood 2 security officers and Dr. Meltara from the Integration Center. Mr. Chen, Quolith announced, your evaluation period has been concluded. We're ready to begin the integration process immediately. Dave stood up slowly. I haven't agreed to integration. Your agreement is no longer required, Dr. Meltara said clinically. Extended exposure to pre-contact mindsets has been determined to pose a contamination risk to station personnel. Mandatory processing is authorized under Emergency Protocol 7. Kess'ina felt something she had never experienced before: outrage at her own institutions. Dr. Meltara, Mr. Chen hasn't done anything that warrants emergency protocols. He has disrupted established operational procedures and encouraged unauthorized problem-solving initiatives among technical staff. Quolith explained, several human workers have begun questioning standard protocols and requesting permission to implement unapproved modifications. Because those modifications would actually improve system performance, Dave said calmly, system performance is less important than operational stability, Dr. Meltara replied. Individual initiative creates unpredictable variables that compromise overall efficiency. The security officers moved to flank Dave, but he remained perfectly still. Dr. Kess'ina, remember what I told you about turning things off and on again? Dave, this isn't a technical problem you can solve with simple logic, isn't it? Dave smiled with the same confidence he had shown when facing the Kepler's Edge crisis. The consortium has a system that's stuck in a loop. It keeps trying to solve problems using methods that create more problems. He activated the workstation's emergency override function, something that Kess'ina hadn't even known existed. Immediately, alarms began sounding throughout the station as every non-critical system initiated shutdown procedures. What are you doing? Quolith demanded. Forcing a reset, Dave replied. Sometimes when a system is too corrupted to fix, you have to start over. The emergency shutdown had triggered lockdown protocols that sealed compartments and restricted movement throughout the station. More importantly, it had activated backup communication systems that bypassed normal administrative controls. Dave quickly accessed the emergency broadcast network and opened a channel to every terminal on Nexus 7. His voice carried through corridors, workshops, and living quarters as he addressed the station's entire population. This is Dave Chen speaking to all technical personnel. I know many of you have been thinking about better ways to solve the problems you encounter every day. I know you've been told that following protocols is more important than actually fixing things. But you're engineers and technicians and problem solvers. You know when something isn't working right. Throughout the station, human workers stopped what they were doing and listened. For the first time in years, someone was speaking to them as if they were capable of independent thought. The Integration Center isn't designed to help you, Dave continued. It's designed to make you stop thinking for yourselves, but you can choose to remember what it feels like to solve problems, to question procedures that don't make sense, and to trust your own expertise. Dr. Meltera was frantically working to override the broadcast, but Dave had used emergency protocols that required multiple authorization codes to interrupt. Every system on this station could be running better. Every problem you've been told to accept as inevitable has a solution. You know this because you're the ones who see how these systems actually work every day. Trust yourselves. The broadcast ended as station security finally managed to cut the emergency communication lines. But it was too late. Throughout NEX-US-7, human technicians were looking at each other with expressions that their supervisors had never seen before. In the waste management section, Engineer Yalara began implementing the unauthorized modifications she had been considering for months. In the power distribution center, a team of human workers started bypassing the inefficient routing protocols that had been causing ongoing problems. Most significantly, in the integration center itself, newly arrived humans who had been listening to the broadcast began asking different questions about the procedures they were being offered. "You've contaminated the entire station," Dr. Meltera said with something approaching panic. "It will take months to recondition all the affected personnel." Or, Dave suggested, you could accept that people work better when they're allowed to think. Administrator Quolith activated his emergency communicator. All security teams. Implement full lockdown procedures. Begin immediate collection of affected personnel for emergency psychological processing. But as security teams moved through the station, they encountered something unexpected. Human workers weren't passively accepting detention. They were asking questions, demanding explanations, and most problematically, working together to resist the roundup procedures. For the first time in 3 centuries, humans on a consortium facility were acting like humans. The resistance wasn't violent, but it was comprehensive. Technical systems that had been running smoothly under careful supervision began experiencing mysterious malfunctions as human operators implemented their own improved procedures rather than following official protocols. Within hours, NEX-US-7 was operating more efficiently than it had in years, but completely outside the control of its administrative hierarchy. Dave watched this transformation from his quarters, where he remained under guard, but no longer isolated. Kess'ina had chosen to stay with him, rather than report to her supervisors, and through the workstation's monitoring systems, they could observe the changes spreading throughout the station. "This won't last," Kess'ina said quietly. "The consortium has resources to deal with isolated incidents of resistance." "Maybe," Dave agreed. "But this isn't really about one station. Every human in consortium space has the same capacity for independent thought. They just need to remember how to use it." As if to prove his point, reports began arriving from other facilities throughout the sector. Human technicians who had heard fragments of Dave's broadcast were beginning to implement unauthorized solutions to chronic problems. More importantly, they were communicating with each other, sharing ideas and modifications that violated protocols but improved performance. The cascade effect was exactly what Dave had predicted. Once people remembered that they could think for themselves, that knowledge spread to others who had been waiting for permission to trust their own expertise. 3 days later, a consortium emergency response fleet arrived at Nexus 7 with orders to restore standard operations and process all contaminated personnel through enhanced integration procedures. But they found a station running better than ever, staffed by humans who politely but firmly refused to submit to psychological modification. Dave's final contribution was a simple message transmitted to human workers throughout consortium space. You already know how to solve the problems you face every day. You just need to remember that you don't need permission to be competent. The consortium faced a choice. They could attempt to forcibly reintegrate millions of humans who were now questioning the necessity of integration, or they could accept that some problems are best solved by the people who understand them most directly. Dave never learned which choice they made. A week after his awakening, he was transferred to a classified facility for specialized processing. But by then, his real work was complete. Throughout the galaxy, humans were remembering how to say, "Have you tried a different approach?" and discovering that the most complex systems often had surprisingly simple solutions. Sometimes the best technical support is just reminding people that they're capable of fixing things themselves. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.